In a world where I thought love was a language I'd never speak, his words, "Would you consider going out with me?" struck a chord I never knew I had. I stared blankly at Jude, stunned by his bold invitation. Me, the office recluse, being asked out by one of our most personable clients? It seemed unfathomable. "I know this seems out of the blue," he continued with a warm smile, "but I've wanted to get to know you better for a while now. You intrigue me." I felt my cheeks flush as I scrambled for words. My instinct was to politely decline and retreat to my safe solitary office, but something in his gentle eyes chipped away at my guarded facade. I'd love to," I managed, the words escaping before I could overanalyze their implication. His face lit up with pleasant surprise. "Yeah, great. Are you free Friday night?" I nodded, suddenly feeling shy as scattered memories of high school dances and my college roommates' many suitors flashed through my mind. My scant romantic history felt woefully inadequate preparation for an evening alone with Jude. As we exchanged numbers, planning the location and time, apprehension and excitement dueled within me. I had always admired Jude from afar, drawn to his affable confidence and easy charm. But I never imagined his interest would extend to someone like me, the office introvert who preferred headphones and spreadsheets to happy hours with colleagues. That Friday evening, I agonized over my outfit, changing 3 times before settling on a simple black dress and heels. I barely recognized my reflection, a far cry from the jeans and blouses I lived in at the office. As the Uber approached the restaurant, my nerves kicked into overdrive. "You can do this," I told myself. "Just make conversation." I was greeted by the scent of grilled meat and raucous laughter as I walked through the doors. The buzz of a Friday night crowd set my anxiety on edge. But then I spotted Jude waving at a small table nestled in a quiet corner. His smile eased my tension. "You look beautiful," he said, pulling out my chair. I lowered myself down, smoothing my dress self-consciously. "This place is really nice. Do you come here a lot?" I asked. As we fell into casual banter about local restaurants, my nervousness gradually gave way. Jude's presence was disarming, engaged but relaxed, funny but thoughtful. Our conversation drifted seamlessly from work to hobbies to childhood memories over steak frites and wine. I barely touched my food, too caught up in his entertaining stories to think about eating. Jude jumped from topic to topic with enthusiastic ease, while I mainly listened, interjecting occasional questions or reactions. Despite my tendency to avoid eye contact, I found myself stealing glances at his bright amber eyes as he spoke. After the plates were cleared, Jude glanced at his watch. "I didn't mean to keep you so late. I know it's a work night." "Oh, that's okay," I said quickly. In truth, I had barely noticed the passing hours in his company. As we walked out to catch our Ubers, Jude gently brushed his hand against mine. The subtle contact sent a spark through my skin. "I had a wonderful time, Alara," he said softly. "Would you want to go out again next weekend?" I nodded, suddenly unable to find my voice. As my Uber pulled up, Jude leaned in, planting a delicate kiss on my cheek. "Good night," he whispered before turning to leave. I watched him disappear into the night, my fingers touching the spot his lips had grazed. The chord he struck within me now hummed with new life. I knew in that electric moment that my world would never be the solitary place it once was. Our bliss lasted only a few short years before life threw its first major obstacle at us. Barely 2 years into our marriage, Jude's promising startup collapsed almost overnight, the victim of embezzlement by a duplicitous business partner. I still remember Jude's ashen face when he told me the news over the phone. "It's all gone, Alara. Everything." His voice cracked as he explained how his conniving co-founder had drained their accounts before disappearing without a trace. My heart ached for my kind-hearted husband, knowing how much blood and sweat he had poured into his company. I rushed to meet him, enveloping his slumped frame in my arms. "I'm so sorry, Jude," I whispered, holding him tightly. "We'll get through this. I promise." In the months that followed, we slowly adjusted to our new financial reality. The lease on our trendy apartment was not renewed. Designer brands and upscale restaurants were replaced with thrift stores and home cooking. Jude fell into a period of despair, struggling to pull himself out of bed most mornings, much less send out job applications. Eventually, our dwindling savings forced my hand. One late night, Jude came home to find me sitting solemnly at our kitchen table. "We can't avoid it anymore. One of us needs a steady job with benefits, I said gently. Jude stared at the floor silently before sinking into the chair across from me. I know, he finally replied, his voice laced with shame. I'm trying, Alara. These past few months have been difficult. I reached for his hand reassuringly. Let me job hunt for a while. My background may make it easier for me to find something quickly. Though it wounded his pride, Jude eventually conceded. Within a few weeks, I leveraged my financial analysis skills into a mid-level position at a thriving corporation. Meanwhile, Jude half-heartedly submitted applications, his enthusiasm still dampened. Upon receiving my first paycheck, I surprised Jude with dinner at our favorite upscale restaurant, but instead of delighting him, the extravagant evening seemed to underscore his feelings of failure. We can't afford this, Alara, he said sullenly, eyeing the polished surroundings. Not on an administrative assistant's salary. Stung by his thoughtless words, I bit my tongue to restrain a retort. Later, I tried gently broaching his comment, but Jude refused to discuss it further. As I drifted to sleep that night, an uneasy feeling stirred within me. The dynamics of our relationship were shifting, but to what end I did not yet know. Over the next year, Jude cycled through short-lived contract jobs while my career advanced rapidly. Each of my promotions and pay raises seemed to drive the wedge between us in deeper. Pleasant dinners would suddenly flip into moody silences if I mentioned work. Offhand comments about my lucky break stung. But Jude's biggest blow came on the heels of my latest achievement, a senior manager role that nearly doubled my prior income. I arrived home thrilled to share the good news, only to find Jude pacing angrily. I can't keep doing this, he erupted before I could even speak. Watching you succeed so effortlessly while I flounder. Why did I bother with college when you make twice my income without even trying? I stood speechless, stricken by his verbal attack. Jude, that's not fair, I finally responded, fighting back tears. My job requires 80-hour weeks and extensive travel. You know I would happily trade places. Oh, please, he scoffed. You love the fancy office and business trips. Don't pretend this hasn't been the best thing that ever happened to your career. As his cruel words echoed through our silent apartment, an image of the gentle man I married flickered in my mind. The man now standing before me, twisted by envy and pride, felt like a stranger. My heart broke realizing the Jude I loved may be gone forever. The months following Jude's outburst dragged on, our relationship strained by unspoken hurts. My demanding job kept me traveling frequently, leaving little time to mend the widening rift between us. During a rare extended stay home, I was surprised to find a sharply dressed Jude waiting with 2 glasses of wine when I returned one evening. Congratulations are in order, he declared, handing me a glass. I started a new position today, at Richardson Financial. I stared blankly, struggling to process this sudden news after so many months adrift. Jude continued explaining his role as a junior broker at the prestigious firm while I nodded mutely. This is wonderful news, I finally managed. What prompted you to apply there specifically? Jude refilled our glasses, his mood buoyant. I realized I couldn't sulk forever, and I know Richardson was on your dream company's list from business school. I detected an unspoken message in his pointed remark. By choosing a firm I admired, perhaps Jude hoped to prevent any envy on my part. I brushed the implication aside, focusing on my relief at this positive development. Over celebratory pasta, Jude enthusiastically outlined his plans to quickly climb the corporate ladder. I smiled encouragingly, though uncertainty lurked at the back of my mind. Jude's checkered employment history left me skeptical of his staying power in the notoriously cutthroat environment, but I kept silent, not wanting to dampen his fledgling confidence. Well, I'm off to bed, Jude said, kissing my cheek after dinner. 5 a.m. comes early when you actually have somewhere to be. I awoke the next morning to find Jude already gone. A quickly scrawled note on the counter wished me a nice day. As I surveyed the remnants of last night's feast, I felt a palpable emptiness. I longed for the days when lazy Saturday mornings meant lingering in bed together before tackling chores or enjoying leisurely brunch dates. Over the next few months, Jude and I mostly passed like ships in the night. My global travel increased substantially with a major product launch, leaving me perpetually jet-lagged. Meanwhile, Jude rapidly advanced at Richardson Financial, regularly working 12-plus-hour days. We traded quick voicemails and the occasional takeout dinner, too exhausted for meaningful interaction. But slowly, our financial state improved with Jude's rising income. We moved into a more spacious apartment closer to Richardson's headquarters. Jude leased a shiny BMW to match his new professional persona. My pay bumps had bought us time, but now Jude's earnings afforded us true stability. I noticed small changes, too. Jude's expensive haircuts, new custom-tailored suits, and sudden golf habit with the guys from work. During my fleeting visits home, Jude entertained me with amusing corporate stories, though names and context often blurred together. "Richardson sure keeps you busy, I commented one night after Jude dismissed a call from a colleague. "Yeah, it's nonstop, but that's life in this industry," he replied. As he detailed his latest high-profile case, Jude's face glowed with vigor and pride. The shadow of resentment and defeat I had watched haunt him these past years finally lifted. My husband had returned, though in an unexpected form. With our careers firmly stabilized and finances on the rebound, I optimistically hoped our marriage, too, could now begin healing. Surely this new upward trajectory marked the end of our relationship woes. Or so my naive heart believed at the time. But unbeknownst to either of us, an unpredictable storm brewed just over the horizon, one that would change the course of our lives forever. I quit. Jude's fork halted midair, a bit of egg dangling precipitously. "You what?" I took a deep breath, grasping my mimosa tightly. "I quit my job as of today." Jude slowly lowered his fork to the plate with a gentle clink. "I don't understand. Why would you quit without discussing it with me first?" "I know, I'm sorry," I replied. It was an impulsive decision, but the timing felt right. I went on to explain my growing disenchantment with the corporate rat race, the endless slog of meetings and metrics, losing sight of any real purpose. And then an email landed offering me a lucrative freelance financial writing position. Before I could overthink it, I resigned. Jude rubbed his temple, processing this bombshell development. I braced myself for criticism over my rash choice. "Well, I support you," he finally said. "I know how miserable all that travel made you. Just promise you won't become some starving artist now," he added with a wink. I laughed, relief washing over me. "I make more per hour now than with a salary. We'll be fine." In my euphoria over dumping my corporate shackles, I failed to notice Jude's smile not quite reaching his eyes. Over the next few months, I settled happily into my new remote freelance role. The flexible schedule afforded me time to pursue photography and pottery classes, long-neglected passions. With Jude frequently working late, I cherished reconnecting with these creative interests. One evening, while crafting a vase, Jude arrived home unusually early, and not alone. I turned to find an immaculately dressed elderly woman clutching his arm. "Alara, meet my mother Mara," Jude announced. "She'll be staying with us a while." I froze, struggling to process this unexpected guest now surveying my clay-splattered apron with thinly veiled disdain. Jude had never once mentioned his mother coming to visit, much less live with us. "Wonderful to meet you," I managed faintly. "How long exactly was a while?" In the uncomfortable days that followed, I learned Mara's husband had recently passed away after a long illness. According to Jude, the loss left her too fragile to care for their suburban home alone. I empathized with her grief, even as her imposing presence invaded our home. Mara scrutinized our apartment with pursed lips. The modern artwork, my orchid garden, Jude's beloved jazz vinyl collection. Everything seemed to offend her traditional sensibilities. Without asking, she rearranged furniture to allow proper flow, and stocked our kitchen with bizarre health concoctions. Worst of all, Mara's constant, unsolicited advice infuriated me. She critiqued my writing career as a flighty pastime, suggested I dress more modestly, and outright condemned the premarital intimacy Jude and I shared, in our own home. I urged Jude to intervene about his mother's behavior multiple times, but he merely shrugged, responding, "It's just her way. She means well." As Mara's presence infiltrated each room like an invasive species, I sensed my sanctuary dissolving. Lying awake at night, I listened anxiously to Jude reassuring his mother through the thin walls after every minor stressor. The man I once considered my closest confidant now reserved that role for the intruder down the hall who eyed me like a troublesome child. And somehow I had allowed this. The passive husband and domineering mother now controlled our home, while I willingly relinquished my power just to keep the peace. The realization churned a growing fury I could no longer contain. The shrill ringing of my cell phone jarred me from sleep. I fumbled groggily for the device, Jude's name flashing urgently on the screen. "Hello, Jude?" "Alara." His voice was strained with a chilling edge I'd never heard before. "The police just left. Get back here now." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, my groggy mind racing through possible emergencies. Sirens blaring past my hotel had awoken me just an hour ago. Were we robbed? Surely no mere household mishap warranted Jude's cryptic tone. I hurriedly dressed and raced home, pacing tensely as the Uber crawled through early morning traffic. I arrived to find an eerie quiet, no signs of forced entry or robbery. But the acidic scent of bleach hung cloyingly in the air. I moved cautiously through each room, ledgering the undisturbed valuables with confusion before noticing the bathroom. Harsh fluorescent light spilled into the hall from the ajar door. Inside, I gasped to discover blood smeared across the newly scrubbed tile walls. The metallic stench overwhelmed me. I clutched the doorway in horror. What had happened here? Just then Jude emerged, his shirt and hands still speckled with scarlet stains. Upon seeing me, his mouth twisted into a snarl. "There you are. This is your doing," he hissed, jabbing his finger toward the lurid scene. "I told the police what really happened, even covered up your rage tantrum, but if you ever lay hands on my mother again—" "What? Jude, I just got home. What on earth are you saying?" I cried. His bizarre accusation made no sense. But before I could plead further, Mara appeared behind Jude's shoulder, an exaggerated slump in her usually ramrod posture. "I tried so hard to keep the peace between you two," she whimpered pathetically. As Jude comforted his clearly unharmed mother, their distorted narrative finally registered. They had concocted this elaborate scene to frame me as unstable and violent. My hands curled involuntarily into fists as I marched toward Mara, ready to confront her deceit. Sensing imminent confrontation, Jude swiftly positioned himself between us. "Officer Costas allowed us to handle this discreetly, since Mother isn't pressing charges," he said. "But he assured me they'll be keeping close watch." I opened my mouth to refute Jude's outrageous threat, but stopped short. Their determination to paint me as an aggressor was suddenly clear. Engaging would only legitimize this infuriating fabrication. Without a word, I turned my back on them and retreated outside to calm my spiraling thoughts. Over the next week, Jude and Mara carried on with their fraudulent charade. She wore a wrist brace for her sprain, while neighbors and Jude's colleagues received anonymous warnings about my concerning temper. My existence became an endless gauntlet of thinly veiled antagonism and betrayal. Soon after, while enjoying a rare solitary afternoon, the doorbell's obnoxious chime broke my focus. I opened it reluctantly, worried Jude had forgotten his keys again, only to find an unfamiliar gentleman clutching a thick folder. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anthony Giles, Social Services," he stated. "I'll need to speak with you about the incident on the 16th. Before I could protest, he stepped inside, flicking open his folder dramatically to begin his interrogation. As Mr. Giles bombarded me with patronizing questions, implying my guilt, fury and frustration welled up dangerously. But I knew reacting emotionally would only legitimize his suspicions. So I calmly recounted my factual innocence despite his transparent agenda against me. Fortunately, he left empty-handed but warned further outbursts would involve children's services regarding my ability to safely parent. Shutting the door firmly against his retreating back, hot tears finally spilled down my cheeks. The realization crashed over me. To save myself, I had to abandon this house of lies. No matter the cost. I awoke well before sunrise, Jude's whistling snores grating in my ear. Slipping silently from beneath the sheets, I tucked my pre-packed bag by the front door and contemplated my next move. Today was the day. I would finally confront Jude about the cruise brochures and love poems stashed in his gym bag that confirmed my worst fears. For weeks, an unshakable feeling in my gut whispered Jude was having an affair. When traces first surfaced, I rationalized them away, not yet ready to destroy our already fractured bond. But the mounting evidence now demanded action. As I brewed coffee, I had no intention of drinking, My mind raced through potential scripts for the impending confrontation. Jude often left his work phone unattended on the counter, my chance to gather final proof. When I heard the buzz of a new text notification, my pulse quickened. I tapped the phone gently, stomach churning as the lock screen preview exposed everything. Lurid messages from a contact named Lola Peach filled the screen, leaving nothing to doubt. As I scrolled in horror, hot tears spilled down my cheeks at the graphic descriptions of past rendezvous and enthusiastic plans for reconnecting post-cruise. In that moment, something severed deep within me. The tenuous threads still clinging to hope or denial now snapped entirely. I backed away from the damning device, resolve cementing. Today the pretense would end. I busied myself with mundane tidying, awaiting signs of life from the bedroom. Before long, Mara emerged scowling. News of my resignation last week from the volunteer board she convinced me to join had earned persistent cold shoulders. "Morning, Mara," I offered politely. Her responding sneer said everything. As she shambled off to the couch, Jude finally surfaced. I steeled myself for the showdown ahead. "Jude, do you have a minute to chat?" I asked as casually as possible. He glanced at his watch distractedly while gathering work items scattered around the kitchen. "Can it wait, babe?" "Big presentation today," came his dismissive reply. In the past, I would have uttered a timid, "no problem," before sending him off with a forced smile, but not today. "I'm afraid this can't wait," I said, firmly blocking his path. "We need to discuss your upcoming cruise and Lola Peach." I watched the color drain from his face. "What are you talking about?" he sputtered unconvincingly. "I don't know any Lo." "Save it," I snapped. Months of suppressed rage now roared loose. "I'm done with your lies. I saw the disgusting messages you left open on your phone. How long did you think you could keep screwing this whore behind my back?" His lips pressed into a rigid line. Before he could reply, an anguished wail erupted from the couch. We turned to see Mara stagger toward us, heaving with dramatic sobs. "I can't bear this cruelty," she cried. "Jude, she's set on destroying this family over pure fantasy." Jude rushed to comfort her, while casting me an icy glare that screamed, "How could you upset my mother this way?" In past arguments, Mara weaponizing her emotions could shame me into silence, but her histrionic meltdown only hardened my resolve now. Without another word to either of them, I stepped outside, slamming the front door with an earth-shaking finality. As my Uber sped away, I grasped the full reality of what I was fleeing, a pathological narcissist twisted by jealousy. Her weak-willed puppet son, so easily manipulated. Their toxic delusions threatened to subsume me completely. Well, not anymore. Today my emancipation began. In the weeks following my dramatic exit, I immersed myself in dismantling the intricate web of lies Jude and his mother had woven. Meticulously documenting their misdeeds became my obsession. I dodged Jude's endless calls and texts, ranging from righteous indignation to desperate pleas for reconciliation. Responding emotionally served no strategic purpose. Instead, I quietly retained cutthroat attorneys and private investigators, methodically building irrefutable cases of infidelity and slander. With my evidence nearing courtroom-ready status, I decided the time had come for a final confrontation on my terms. I invited Jude and Mara to meet at a posh restaurant downtown, sending the address anonymously to pique their curiosity. Right on time, I spotted Jude entering with Mara clinging possessively to his elbow. Good, they took the bait. Allowing them a few minutes to settle uncomfortably at the table, I finally made my entrance. "You actually came. Bravo," I announced acidly, relishing their shocked expressions at my abrupt arrival. Without waiting for a response, I opened my briefcase and theatrically flung 2 manila folders onto the tablecloth, their damning labels clearly visible. Folder 1, Infidelity. Folder 2, Emotional Abuse and Slander. Jude visibly paled while Mara's razor-sharp eyes narrowed. "Whatever nonsense this contains holds no weight," she scoffed. "You always were drama queen." Ignoring Mara's delusional barbs, I focused intently on Jude. The folder contents will speak for themselves, but allow me to summarize. For the next excruciating half-hour, I calmly detailed Jude's long-running affair and sexting habits backed by photographic evidence, private investigator reports, and credit card receipts. Mara sputtered baseless denials until Jude finally admitted guilt in a choked whisper. "Well, she drove you to it," Mara shrieked. A wife should meet her husband's needs to prevent wandering eyes. Slamming my palm violently on the table, I cut her repulsive tirade short. You will not defend his behavior. He is a grown man responsible for his abhorrent choices. Turning my glare back to Jude, I continued, and according to the investigator, Lola Peach is just one of several women you've maintained relations with. Jude hastily tried placating me by questioning the ethics of hiring spies, but my bone-chilling stare silenced further protests. After a few moments, I resumed my diatribe by exposing their slanderous hoax, portraying me as violent and unstable. I have signed affidavits from the responding officers and social workers strongly disputing your perjured claims, I concluded, shoving the paperwork toward them contemptuously. Watching Jude visibly withdrawing into his seat like a scorned child while Mara seethed quietly was profoundly satisfying. I rose calmly from my seat, gathering the damning evidence now scattered across the table. Consider this your one warning to cease spreading vicious lies about me to salvage your shredded reputations. I still have ample ammunition left if necessary for courtroom proceedings. Leaving them speechless amidst the upended wreckage of secrets and lies, I strode briskly towards sweet freedom. The bindings tethering me to their dysfunction now dissolved fully. I was finally free. Watching the moving truck disappear around the corner, I sighed deeply. The bittersweet pang of signing the divorce papers just hours earlier still lingered, but any residual heartache faded, standing here on the curb before my very own food truck, its cheerful teal paint gleaming brightly in the afternoon sun. My hard-won independence never tasted sweeter. In the 18 months since I confronted Jude and Mara with their deceitful transgressions, much had changed. With an excellent attorney's help, I leveraged the extensive documentation of Jude's philandering against any sympathy for Mara's fictitious abuse claims. The judge took a dim view of their elaborate hoax and utter lack of remorse, as he deemed in the divorce proceedings. Stripped of his polished veneer before the court, Jude acquiesced quickly to my terms, eager to avoid further public scrutiny. The settlement awarded me full ownership of our lavish apartment and 75% of all remaining assets. Jude slunk away in disgrace to lick his wounds, Mara in tow. She had attempted clinging to false reconciliation promises, but I wouldn't be moved. In the quiet aftermath, I blossomed in solitude's fertile soil. My writing career flourished now that energy formerly spent tiptoeing around volatility could be channeled into professional and personal growth. I traveled widely, cultivated new friendships, and most importantly, I cooked. Having rediscovered my passion for fusing flavors during darker days, I began hosting pop-up dining experiences from our apartment. My culinary skills, coupled with charming hospitality, quickly attracted a cult following. Soon, devoted patrons clamored for my signature roasted duck confit tacos and cardamom creme brulee well beyond makeshift dinner parties. When the owner of a failing food truck approached proposing partnership, the universe seemed to align perfectly with my entrepreneurial visions. I invested a chunk of savings into revitalizing the charming little hut on wheels into a truly eye-catching mobile kitchen. Bold teal paint and twinkling string lights attracted droves of curious admirers from the outset, but perhaps most satisfying was discovering genuine romance unexpectedly. During my first promotional photo shoot for Alara's, I clicked instantly with the talented photographer Graham over sharing travel tales while scouting locations. Our coffees afterwards kindled into deeper connection. Unlike Jude's love bombing, Graham's affections grew steadily out of genuine compatibility and mutual respect. On our recent trip celebrating the new truck launch, Graham mused the stunning vineyard views looked ideal for a small, intimate vow exchange someday soon. My heart fluttered hearing this wonderful man, with no ulterior motives, speak so earnestly of our future together. Just then, my reminiscing was interrupted by the loud rumble of the first guest's arrival, my dear friend and unofficial catering assistant, Eva. She had proven an invaluable pillar of support when other fair-weather friends scattered after my dizzying descent from corporate executive's wife to scandalous tabloid feature. I embraced her warmly. "Well, no backing out now," I joked. "Did those glowing Instagram stories I sent over pique your interest?" "Are you kidding? I've been craving duck tacos all week after that preview." She laughed. Now stop keeping me from that sublime food and go wow all these strangers. Grinning broadly, I fired up the grill with infectious enthusiasm. Tonight marked the genesis of my hard-won new existence, one defined not by toxic gazes or dancers hiding in the wings waiting to step on broken dreams. Instead, possibility and autonomy shone brightly, their rays feeding seeds for whatever rich future I chose to cultivate next. One scrumptious taco at a time. The day my world turned upside down began like any other. I was in the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air, when my phone rang. Glancing at the screen, I saw Dr. Jennings' name flash. My heart sank. "Elaine Morrison," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Morrison, it's about your father, George. I'm sorry to say it's cancer, terminal. He might have 6 months, perhaps less." Dr. Jennings' voice was a blend of professionalism and sympathy. The news hit me like a physical blow. My father, the man who raised me single-handedly after Mom passed, was now facing his final chapter. Alone. The thought was unbearable. I found Ethan in his study, surrounded by piles of paperwork. "Ethan, we need to talk. It's about Dad. He's dying." Ethan looked up, his expression barely changing. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" The coldness in his voice stung, but I pushed on. "I want him to move in with us. He shouldn't be alone now, and we have plenty of space." Ethan scoffed, a sound that echoed off the walls of the study. "Here, live with us? Elaine, be reasonable. This house is for us, not for charity cases. If you're so desperate, let him stay in the garden shed. But that's as far as I go." The garden shed. The words echoed in my mind, a cruel and mocking suggestion. How had my life come to this? Marrying Ethan, I had hoped for love and companionship, but all I found was a life of silent transactions and cold indifference. That night, as I lay in our bed, Ethan's snoring filling the room, I couldn't help but think back to the days of my youth. Days filled with laughter and dreams, days when the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. And now, here I was, contemplating setting up a home for my dying father in a garden shed, because my husband, the man who vowed to stand by me, had no room for compassion in his heart. The irony of it all was not lost on me. Ethan, who always preached about family values, was now turning his back on the most basic human decency. The realization was bitter, and it kept me awake long into the night. As dawn broke, a determination stirred within me. If Ethan wouldn't help, I would do it myself. I would make the garden shed a home for my father, a place where he could spend his final days surrounded by love and care, even if it was just from me. I rose from the bed, my mind made up. It was time to take a stand, for my father, and perhaps for myself too. As I embarked on the task of transforming the garden shed into a livable space for my father, memories of the past swirled through my mind, each one a sharp contrast to my current life. I remembered the days of my youth in our small but happy home, where laughter was our constant companion. My father, George, was a beacon of strength and kindness, filling the void left by my mother's early passing. He taught me the value of hard work and the joy of simple living. But our simple life took an unexpected turn when I was 19. The Daltons, a prominent and influential family in our town, appeared at our doorstep with a proposal that felt more like a decree. My father had accumulated a debt, a secret he had kept hidden, fueled by his descent into gambling after Mom's death. The Daltons offered a solution: marry their son Ethan, and the debt would be forgiven. The choice was presented as an opportunity, but it was a demand. My dreams, my aspirations, and my budding relationship with Michael, the boy next door who held my heart, were all swept away in that moment. Ethan Dalton, the man who now lay beside me night after night, indifferent to my existence, was a stranger on our wedding day. Our marriage was a transaction, devoid of love or warmth, a sacrifice I made to save my father from ruin. Over the years, I had learned to play the role of Ethan's wife, managing our home and assisting in his business, without compensation or gratitude. My life had become a series of routines, my dreams shelved and forgotten. Yet as I worked on the shed, painting walls and selecting furniture, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years began to stir within me. This project, though born out of necessity, was mine. It was a tangible connection to the independent and spirited girl I once was, a girl who believed in making a difference. As I stood back to admire my handiwork, the shed no longer seemed like a symbol of Ethan's cruelty, but a testament to my resilience. It was small, but it was filled with the warmth and love that our sprawling mansion so conspicuously lacked. I realized then that this shed was not just for my father. It was a sanctuary for my own weary soul, a place where I could reconnect with the parts of myself that I had lost in the years of my loveless marriage. It was in this small space, amidst the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings, that I made a silent vow. I would be there for my father, just as he had always been there for me, and in doing so, I would find a way back to myself, to the Elaine who dared to dream and love. The transformation of the garden shed into a cozy abode for my father was more than just a physical change. It was a reflection of my inner turmoil. As I worked, my thoughts often drifted to the strained tapestry of my marriage with Ethan. Our relationship, if it could be called that, was a study in silent endurance. Ethan was always more a businessman than a husband. He viewed everything through the lens of profit and loss, including our marriage. The warmth and connection that should have adorned a marital life were conspicuously absent in ours. We were like two parallel lines under one roof, destined never to meet. In the early years, I tried to breach the chasm between us. I attempted to take an interest in his work, to be the wife I thought he wanted, but my efforts were met with indifference, or at times with barely concealed irritation. Ethan had no interest in a partner. He wanted an accessory, someone to manage his home and host his business associates. As the years passed, I found myself fading into the background of Ethan's life. I was there, yet invisible, my existence acknowledged only when it served a purpose. The realization was a slow and painful awakening. I was living in a gilded cage, a bird with clipped wings. My father's illness and Ethan's callous reaction to it were the final straws. How could the man I had spent nearly 3 decades with show such disregard for basic human empathy? The realization that my life with Ethan had been devoid of genuine affection hit me with renewed force. But amidst this turmoil, there was a silver lining. My son, Daniel, was the one true joy in my life. Raising him had given me purpose, a reason to smile amidst the coldness of my marriage. Daniel, now a young man studying at university, was everything Ethan was not: kind, compassionate, and full of life. I often wondered what Daniel thought of his father's behavior, of the palpable tension that hung in the air whenever Ethan was home. But Daniel, ever the peacemaker, never voiced his concerns. He was the bridge between two worlds that refused to converge. As I placed the final cushion on the newly installed couch in the shed, a sense of accomplishment washed over me. It was modest, but it was filled with love and care, something that my vast, luxurious home lacked. This small shed had become a symbol of my resilience, a quiet rebellion against the life of silent compliance I had been living. It was a step, however small, towards reclaiming the parts of myself that I had lost in the shadows of my marriage. And as I looked at the shed, now ready to welcome my father, I made a silent promise to myself. I would no longer be a spectator in my own life. It was time to take control, to find my voice again. For my father, for Daniel, and for the Elaine who deserved to be heard. The days following the completion of the shed were a whirlwind of emotion and activity. My father moved in, his frail frame a stark reminder of the precious little time we had left. Despite his condition, his eyes sparkled with gratitude as he settled into his new abode. The small space was filled with love and memories, a sharp contrast to the cold luxury of the main house. During this time, Ethan's true nature became increasingly apparent. His visits to my father were perfunctory, devoid of any genuine concern. His indifference was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was not unexpected. What pained me more was the growing realization that I had allowed myself to be diminished, to become a mere shadow in my own life. One evening, as I was organizing old files in Ethan's study, I stumbled upon documents that laid bare the extent of his deceit. Bank statements, emails, and letters painted a picture of a man who was not just indifferent, but morally corrupt. There were dubious business deals, secret accounts, and, most shockingly, evidence of infidelity. The discovery shook me to my core. The man I had married, the father of my child, was a stranger. His betrayal was not just breach of our marital vows, but a complete disregard for the family we had built together. In that moment, something within me shifted. The years of suppressed anger and disappointment surged to the surface, fueling a newfound resolve. I could no longer be a bystander in my own life story. I started to secretly gather evidence of Ethan's misdeeds. Each document, each piece of evidence was a step towards my liberation. It was not just about seeking justice, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-worth. As the days passed, I became more determined. I began to plan my exit from this loveless marriage. My conversations with my father, once filled with shared memories and laughter, now often turned to discussions of the future. "You've always been strong, Elaine," my father would say, his voice weak but his eyes full of love. "You deserve happiness. You and Daniel. Don't let Ethan take that away from you." My father's words were a balm to my troubled soul. In his wisdom and love, I found the strength to envision a life beyond Ethan's shadow. The final push came unexpectedly. One day, as Ethan berated me over some trivial matter, something inside me snapped. His words, once capable of wounding me deeply, now fell on deaf ears. "I'm not your property, Ethan," I said calmly, the clarity in my voice surprising even myself. "I am a person, deserving of respect and love, neither of which you've ever given me." Ethan's response was a mix of shock and anger, but I was beyond caring. I had spent too many years under his thumb, and I would no longer allow him to control my narrative. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. I would leave Ethan, but not empty-handed. I would fight for what was rightfully mine and Daniel's. It was not just about financial security. It was about setting things right, about ensuring that Ethan faced the consequences of his actions. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I met with lawyers, gathered evidence, and prepared my case. It was a daunting task, but with each step I felt more empowered, more like the Elaine I had once been. And then, one sunny morning, as I sat in the shed with my father, watching the birds flit about in the garden, I knew it was time. I was ready to face Ethan, ready to end the charade of a marriage that had been nothing but a prison. "I'm going to do it, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I'm going to leave Ethan and start a new life. For me, for you, for Daniel." My father smiled. A fragile but genuine smile. "I've always believed in you, Elaine. It's time for you to believe in yourself." With that, I stood up, my resolve firm. It was time to close this chapter of my life and begin anew. Elaine Morrison was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a woman in control of her destiny. The day I confronted Ethan was a day of reckoning. Armed with my gathered evidence and bolstered by a newfound sense of self-worth, I faced him in what had once been our shared study. The room, once a symbol of our joint life, now felt like a battleground. "Ethan," I began, my voice steady despite the tumultuous emotions within. "This marriage, our life together, it's over. I'm leaving you." His reaction was a mix of disbelief and scorn. "Leave me, Elaine? You have nothing without me. Where will you go? You think you can survive out there on your own?" His words, meant to intimidate, only strengthened my resolve. "I have more than you realize, Ethan. I have evidence of your infidelity, your shady business dealings, and your financial mismanagement. I'm not leaving empty-handed." The look of shock on Ethan's face was, in a way, satisfying. For years, I had been under his thumb, underestimated and undervalued. But now, the tables were turned. Over the following weeks, our life unraveled like a poorly knit sweater. The divorce proceedings were bitter, with Ethan trying to discredit me at every turn. But I stood my ground, backed by irrefutable evidence and a legal team that believed in my cause. As the truth of Ethan's actions came to light, his reputation, both personal and professional, began to crumble. The community we had once been a part of turned its back on him. His business associates distanced themselves, and even his closest friends began to see him for who he truly was. In a twist of fate, it was Ethan who ended up isolated and alone, much like he had made me feel all these years. The empire he had built on lies and deceit was now his prison, a constant reminder of his moral bankruptcy. The final divorce settlement was more than just a financial victory for me. It was a symbol of my liberation. I received a significant portion of our assets, enough to ensure a comfortable life for myself, my father, and Daniel. With the legal battles behind me, I focused on rebuilding my life. I bought a modest but beautiful home, not far from the university where Daniel was studying. It was a fresh start, a place where my father could spend his remaining days surrounded by love and care. The house quickly became a home, filled with laughter and warmth. a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal mansion I had left behind. My father's health, while still fragile, seemed to improve in this new environment, buoyed by the positive energy that surrounded him. As for myself, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I took up gardening, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I also began volunteering at a local charity, finding fulfillment in helping others. The most significant change, however, was within me. I no longer saw myself through Ethan's eyes. I was no longer the timid, compliant wife, but a strong, independent woman who had faced adversity and emerged victorious. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, a sense of contentment washed over me. I had come a long way from the scared young girl who had entered a loveless marriage to save her father. I had fought for my dignity, for my right to happiness, and I had won. My journey was not just about leaving Ethan, it was about finding myself. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with strength and grace. Elaine Morrison had finally come home.